Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Statements coming out of Iran indicate that Iran doesn't think the 2015 nuclear deal, known as a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, can be saved. At the minimum, the chances of its survival are fading since the 2018 U.S. decision to unilaterally withdraw from it. According to reports, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has ordered the removal of all limits on nuclear research and development, the third major step to scale down commitments to the 2015 nuclear accord. I, as of now, announced a third step, Rouhani said on state television, just as the United States announced that it was imposing sanctions against an oil shipping network with ties to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran is ordered to immediately start whatever is needed in the field of research and development and abandon all the commitments that were in place regarding research and development. Late last month, the possibility of some movement between US and Iran presented itself when French President Emmanuel Macron surprised everyone by inviting Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif to the sidelines of the summit. Macron also indicated that France was working towards a meeting between Trump and Rouhani. Later, however, speaking at a think tank in Kuala Lumpur, Zarif said such a meeting was only possible if the US lifted the sanctions on Iran. France also came up with the idea of a US $15 billion credit line for Iran, which was conditional on US acceptance of it. Reports from the US indicate Washington is unlikely to accept the plan. Earlier, Islamic Republic news agency had reported that Tehran could go back to the deal if the US accepted the French plan. The optimism of a breakthrough seems to have dissipated. What next is our plan of discussion today, and we are joined by Dr. Nakhai, who's a nuclear expert and joins us from New York, and Ambassador Matthew Bryza, who joins us from Istanbul. Dr. Nakhai, how exactly is the situation going to unfold? The optimism, and we did a program a couple of weeks ago on this with reference to President Macron's initiative, and there was a sense the panelists thought that there was a possibility of some kind of breakthrough. But do you think that the possibility of such a breakthrough is now less than what people thought it would be a couple of weeks ago?
Well, it's hardly you can call President Macron's initiative a reasonable proposal. Put it in perspective, President Macron is proposing to get permission from United States for France to impose its will on Iran for $15 billion for breaking the international United Nations Security Council resolution. That's hardly a deal. That's another imposition. They should remember that colonialism is over and is not coming back. France claims that it's a sovereign country. Why does it need to get permission from the United States to do something? So from the beginning, that proposal has a monumental problem with it. Europeans have signed and have agreed to stand by JCPOA, and they should perform their duty if United States is not, and do what they should do. They are not, and they are finding excuses for permission to do what they must do from the beginning. That's number one. Number two, within the JCPOA, which was put together under mistrust of all the countries, 5+1 and Iran, there are mechanisms that if there are violation of the commitments to JCPOA, there are points that Iran can do beyond its commitment. And Iran is doing exactly that. The recent expansion into research and development is not the biggest step in terms of nuclear, but is big step in terms of giving important notice to the world that Iran is serious with its commitment to JCPOA and expect other countries to do that too. If they don't perform according to their commitment to JCPOA, then Iran sees no reason to hamper itself. You can see Iran's move more as a warning rather than a threat, and also as part of what it has built into JCPOA, and Iran is a bit expanding based on there, and you cannot call that a violation. And the correct thing for that to be that the 5+1 go back to their commitment to JCPOA and make sure that all the terms of that will be performed. Remember, that was a monumental international agreement, something that should have been very savored and something that should have been put as a basis for international dealing. It's sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council and signed by its 5 permanent members.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Reasonable.
Dr. Khai, I get your point. But let me hop over to Ambassador Braiza. Ambassador Braiza, this is obviously the Iranian position. And the fact is that the IAEA inspections have also revealed that Iran has been in full compliance of the JCPOA. But the US position under the Trump administration has been, A, with reference to JCPOA, that it only delays the Iranian capacity, doesn't really stem it. But more than that, that they're focusing on Iran's power projection in the greater Middle East, the Iranian militias, Iran's role in Syria, and obviously this is in consonance with their allies, Israel, and also the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So these positions are kind of irreconcilable at one level. So the optimism with reference to Macron's initiative or proposal, as Dr. Nakhai says, seems to have dissipated now because it appears that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, Mr. Haider, I'm not sure it has dissipated. I agree with everything that you said. And in addition, by the way, one of the Trump administration's objections is that the JCPOA doesn't cover Iran's missile program.
Correct.
But I actually think a complex bargaining is happening right now. A negotiation is happening. And as our other guest rightfully said, Iran is sending a signal. It's sending a signal that it is losing its patience. By the way, Iran has been remarkably patient since May 2018, when the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in violation of a UN Security Council resolution. It might sound strange for me saying this as a former U.S. diplomat, even one who is close to the Republican Party, but the truth is the truth. So the U.S. has been in the wrong, has been on the wrong side of international law on this. It's simply not a viable international legal position to take if you care about having international civilization instead of rule of the jungle, to agree to something, a multilateral agreement, and then just say, when a new government comes into power, I don't like it. It doesn't have these other factors involved. So I agree with Dr. Nakhai that, yes, the parties need to get back to the JCPOA. The question is how, practically how. I think Donald Trump decided to condemn the JCPOA for his own ego and domestic political reasons. He wants to blame all sorts of problems in the world on his predecessor, Barack Obama. Barack Obama was the lead on the U.S. side, obviously, in negotiating the JCPOA. So Trump calls it the worst agreement in history. But if you listen more carefully to Donald Trump, he wants a deal. He wants a new agreement. In fact, he even said a couple of days ago that he thinks that President Rouhani is going to want to talk. He thinks that Iran, well, he knows it's a great country. He can make Iran, help it make it great again, and come up with an even better agreement. So he has an idea out in his mind on how to adjust the JCPOA in a way that could be mutually acceptable. So enter President Macron. I think President Macron is trying to be pragmatic. He's looking for a way to enable the EU and the other signatories to fulfill their obligations under the JCPOA, which is to allow Iran to, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, re-enter the global economy. That's what the $15 billion fund is all about. So
but here's, Ambassador Braiza, sorry, I'm interjecting into what you're saying, but here's the thing. This particular oil credit line is conditional on United States acceptance of it. But before this, the European signatories to the deal were trying to create what they initially called the special purpose vehicle, and later, they renamed it Instex and all that. But in order for somehow Iran's economy to bypass, if not the primary, then at least the secondary sanction. But that also has not really worked out. And that has been something that Iran has constantly been talking about and saying, well, guys, if you want us to stick to this, then you've got to do something about these sanctions.
Yeah, totally understandable. And I think what we're seeing here is the initial EU mechanism failed because the global economy and EU member states' economies are still so dependent on the US financial system and the dollar. And so it's not so much, I think, a case of Macron going to the colonial master and asking permission. It's a practical matter. If the $15 billion credit line or euro credit line is to be functional, then the U.S. has to pledge not to sanction or apply sanctions to any European entity who would participate. Absolutely. So it's just a practical matter, and I think the positions are starting to align a bit, I hope.
Okay, I'll come back to that because that's a very interesting point. But to Dr. Nakhai. Dr. Nakhai, when Ambassador Braiza says that some complex negotiations are playing out, do you agree with that? And when we say that Trump has his own idea of a deal, then what kind of deal is he looking at? Because his objections are not just to the nuclear side of things. As Ambassador Braiza said, reminded us that it's also about the Iranian missile program and, of course, the Iranian role, or what the US says, power projection in the greater Middle East. So what kind of deal are we looking at, assuming that one is being worked out?
Well, we have to look at it that it's misunderstanding of JCPOA. With no relationship for over 30-some years between Iran and the United States, JCPOA was supposed to be the first step toward gaining each other's respect and trust and go from there forward. It was not an end point, but was a starting point. He could very well stay, the United States could have very well stayed with JCPOA and said that we want to further now expand it on other areas of disagreement and try see if we can come to an agreement. You don't go back to create a greater mistrust on the first step and say we want to get a better deal. What is a better deal? How do you define a better deal? It was not President Obama who signed that deal. There were at least over 500 diplomats, economists, scientists, and practitioners of the United States behind that deal, that for every part of it, they studied, they analyzed it, and that is what the best they could come up with. There is no better deal. Doesn't make sense. You always go after optimized deal. In another word, a deal that everybody has something in it that is important to itself and has to give up on some other items which is not a primary item. So what President Trump thinks is a better deal may not be a better deal for the others, and then it would be an insult to the world, to the UN Security Council, and to the other 5 nations if you say that, well, we're going to go back to another deal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Barad Dakhai speaking with us on this issue. Back to Ambassador Braiza. Ambassador Braiza, I don't know if you've seen the story put out by Petroleum Economist about the Chinese essentially investing into the Iranian oil and gas sector. and it's like upwards of, I think, if I've got the figures right, there's like $102 billion or $120 billion. It's pretty large amounts. Now, and of course, there are other aspects of it, including the right of first refusal to the Chinese companies, and the Chinese are also going to put in about 5,000 of their own security forces, people to secure their facilities. Do you think that's going to make any difference to the Iranian economic woes?
Yeah, I think it can make a big difference. I mean, you know that right now, China has continued its purchases of Iranian oil, even though the sales of Iranian oil have been reduced dramatically. That is a financial lifeline. And China is saying to President Trump, essentially, we are throwing down the gauntlet. You are threatening us. In fact, you've launched a trade war. You're threatening us with higher tariffs. We're a great power. We're about to be, they think, the greatest power. And we don't have to listen to you or abide by your secondary sanctions. In fact, we, the Chinese, we precisely wish to undermine the power of the dollar and the U.S. financial system. And that's partially what the trade war is about. So therefore, the Chinese are doing something rational in Iran and saying, go ahead, try to sanction our companies. We don't even want to use your financial system. So we're reaching a new historical inflection point in terms of superpower economic relations. And it's playing out in Iran as well as in direct U.S.-Chinese trade negotiations.
So if this comes to pass, and assuming that there is no new deal between the U.S. and Iran, do you think the Iranian economy will be able to survive the tough sanctions?
Well, it all depends on how you define survive. The Iranian people have put up with such tremendous hardship, and who knows what the limit is of their endurance, and what does it mean to be a limit? Yes, there are people in Washington, I think, who would like to squeeze the Iranian economy so far that the Iranian people rise up and overthrow the current regime. But the pattern has been different, right? When the Iranian state, and not the government, but when the state and the economy have been under duress, the Iranian people have only grown more unified. And I think that's human nature. I think every country on earth basically responds in a similar way. So I don't know what the limit is to the survivability of the Iranian economy, but I think they can endure quite a bit of pain. And unfortunately for the people of Iran.
Yeah, well, this is like what Brody quoted Adam Smith saying to one of his young friends with reference to English-French wars. He said, there's a lot of ruin in a nation. And yes, you're right. I mean, the Iranians have, essentially endured very tough sanctions over a very long period of time. We're also joined by Reza Ghulamzadeh from Tehran. Mr. Ghulamzadeh, we were talking about this prospect of a deal or some kind of deal being worked out between Tehran and the U.S., even as President Rouhani has said that we are going to essentially announce the third step with reference to diluting the 2015 nuclear accord. Do you get a sense that back-channel negotiations are on and that there might be some likelihood of some kind of breakthrough?
Negotiations are meaningful when there are some fruits and results from that. The point is that either back-channel or very overt negotiations are not leading to any conclusions and results because we have two sides. Iran, which has been committed to the nuclear deal from day one and is still committed to the nuclear deal. And even the reduction of the commitments is based on the JCPOA. And on the other end, you have the United States and President Trump's administration, who doesn't want to actually realize that when you sign an agreement, you are obliged to follow the commitments, and you should follow all the things that you have promised to do. And they have done nothing on either under President Obama nor under President Trump. And they are just demanding Iran not only to abide by the JCPOA, but also give more points and give up with the defense systems, with all the foreign policy it has, with everything, and receive in return nothing. That's not something that it could work anywhere in the world between any two negotiations.
Mr. Ghulamzadeh, despite Iranian statements, we were just discussing this before you joined us, that Iran, in terms of the legal normative side of it, is on a much stronger wicket compared to the United States under the Trump administration. But Iran could have said, well, we're going to chuck this deal anyway because, the main guarantor of the deal has unilaterally walked away from it. But Iran hasn't done that. So Iran does want to have some kind of, modus vivendi, shall I say, or some kind of deal which allows this to survive and also the sanctions to get lifted. So that means the Iranian economy is hurting. Would you agree with this assessment?
Iran has been under sanctions for 40 years from the early after the revolution. Has been under sanctions I remember 3-4 American presidents claiming that they are imposing most crippling sanctions on Iran. So all of them have been claiming so, and Iran is still in place. The point is that Iran's economy has always been separated from the global economy, and because of that, it's some sort of, let's say, guaranteed from all the tensions and the problems that could happen to that. So Iran has survived for 40 years and will survive. All the recent actions that we are seeing from the Americans shows and proves that the maximum pressure campaign has already actually failed. And sanctions and such things cannot actually work to bring Iran to its knees. So yes, Iranian economy has some difficulties, but more than the sanctions and foreign elements, it is actually domestic mismanagement that is posing that the pressure on Iranian economy and Iranian people.
Okay, Mr. Ghulamzadeh, before I let you go, I want to ask you a direct question. Now we know that the missilery or the missile development is not part of the JCPOA, but Iran says that it does not want to acquire nuclear weapons capability. But Iran has continued to develop missiles, IRBMs and all that. Now, why would a state develop a missile that with ranges of up to 2,000 or 2,500 kilometers if it wants to hit a tactical target and not use a strategic warhead?
It's very simple. Iran has always been under threat from the Israelis, from the Americans. Just remember, it was just a while ago that the American drone intruded Iranian airspace. Let's just remember that Iranian ship has been seized and illegally based on false accusations by the English forces. So in a region like Middle East that is already volatile, you are seeing all the wars around Iran with hundreds of U.S. bases, military bases around Iran. So Iran is
you have the S-300s. You have the S-300 A280s for that. But anyway, thank you so much. That was Hamid Raza Ghulamzadeh speaking with us. Before I wrap up this segment, quickly back to Ambassador Braiza with the same question. You need obviously very accurate missiles for counter-force targeting. Why would you send a missile all the way at 2,500 kilometers to hit a tactical target or make a tactical strike?
Yeah, in other words, if you launch an intermediate-range ballistic missile with nuclear capability, then you're going to be starting a wider conflict. You're going to be starting a war. It may be that you would make a tactical strike with a non-nuclear warhead or a series of strikes in sort of an action-reaction counterforce conventional conflict with Israel, and it may also be that maybe Iran has under Ahmadinejad, they had a very aggressive approach to Israel, which was to wipe it off the face of the earth. So under such a strategy, then it does make sense to have those nuclear armed missile capabilities. But I pray it never comes to anything like that. I think probably having those capabilities as well is a matter of national pride and a way to show the globe and the Americans that you shouldn't trifle with Iran. You shouldn't treat it like a vassal state. You shouldn't kick it around. It's a great power with, millennia of history, and it has military strength as well that should not be ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was Ambassador Matthew Bryza speaking with us. We shall take a short break, and when we return, we'll discuss the U.S.-Turkey tensions, especially with reference to the safe zone in Syria. Stay with us. Turkey is not happy, that's for sure, as if the S-400 system tensions and the decision by the United States to separate Turkey from the F-35 fighter jet program were not enough. The problem of a safe zone in Syria for the Syrian refugees continues to linger. Interestingly, the safe zone idea was first mooted by the US President Donald Trump, but it has since been bogged down over Turkey's objections to a key US ally, the Kurdish YPG, which Ankara considers a terrorist organization. Now, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is threatening to open the gates to allow Syrian refugees to leave Turkey for Western countries unless the zone is established soon. Ankara has also said that it will unilaterally move in to establish the safe zone unless there's quick progress on the issue. Turkey is hosting some 3.6 million Syrian refugees, and Erdogan's threat, according to reports, has raised the specter of a surge of people into Europe that could dwarf even the recent migration crisis at its peak. Meanwhile, Times of Israel quoted a Reuters news to say Erdogan has said that Turkey needs nuclear weapons. We have Israel nearby as almost neighbors. They scare other nations by possessing these. No one can touch them. To discuss US-Turkey relations, Turkey's interest in the region, especially in Syria, and the talk about nuclear weapons, we are joined by Yusuf Aram, who is a political analyst at the TRT World, Yahya Al-Aridi, who's spokesman for the Syrian Negotiation Commission, joins us from Riyadh. And we will shortly also have John Hasusu. But let's begin with Yusuf Aram here. Yusuf Aram, let's go in reverse. What's this talk about nuclear weapons? Is this like serious, or is this something that President Erdogan has just kind of thrown out there?
I think President Erdogan was trying to make a point from his "the world is bigger than five" ideology, and he was mainly hitting at the United Nations Security Council and a small group of nations which makes major decisions for the world. But he did not completely shift his rhetoric just towards the UN Security Council. At the end of his statement, at the end of his speech, he also said Turkey was conducting work, which mainly probably means a feasibility. If this is something that Turkey needs, how would Turkey go about obtaining or developing a nuclear weapon? Now, even if the president is very serious about this, this is something that's a long way down the road right now.
No, absolutely. I agree with you there. I totally agree. But here's the point. Turkey is a signatory to the NPT. Of course, NPT has a withdrawal clause there, and Turkey can cite a state interest to withdraw from NPT. But the fact is that it's kind of, the statement has taken everyone with surprise. And because it also comes at a time when Turkey under President Erdogan is seen to be a state that has not only developed tensions with the US, but is generally also not very friendly with Israel, and seems to think that the old security architecture and the kind of sort of neo-colonial security architecture needs to change. Is my sense correct there?
Well, we shouldn't say they're at odds. Well, we should say there's divergent interests coming into play now. The two countries that you mentioned, specifically Israel and the United States, have had a security-based relationship with Turkey. And when security interests diverge and these relationships aren't deep enough to handle these problems, and these problems turn into full-blown crisis with these countries, yes, they do have problems. But if the relationship was deepened to involve very important commercial also tourism, energy, defense relations. It was a deeper relationship. It could absorb these types of security shocks, but we're not seeing that in the U.S.-Turkey relationship, and we're not seeing that in the Turkey-Israel relationship either. But going back to the nuclear weapons issue, I think it was more of a message than just taking it verbatim as saying that Turkey's ready to develop nuclear weapons. I don't think Turkey's ready to move towards that direction right now. Turkey's always been against nuclear weapons. It's been against proliferation. So I don't see a complete policy change right now, at least. We need to follow President Erdogan closer to see what exactly his view is on this topic.
Fair enough. Let's go to Syria now, and let me pull in Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi. Dr. Al-Aridi, what's your sense of the safe zone idea that President Trump mooted and which now Ankara is pushing for?
First of all, Turkey thought of this idea of a safe zone years ago in the Syrian conflict, 4 or 5 years ago, to the northern part of Syria and close to the borders of Turkey. Due to the influx of so many people because of the bombardment on the part of the regime and its supporters, and due to the fact that there are millions of Syrians now in Turkey, it could be a place that would be a safe haven for Syrians, safe from the bombardment, etc., etc. Now, this idea was faced with the presence, first of all, of Daesh, of the allied forces, and at the same time, Turkey found itself between the rock and the hard place with regard to the United States and Russia. It has this alliance with Russia, and they worked on the Syrian case for years now, since 2016. And that put Turkey face to face with the United States in a form of, I believe, some sort of tension. Later on, Turkey tried to get the support of the United States in order to support this safe zone. It got a positive attitude, a positive view towards that, due to the fact that this area is insecure, and later on, when Daesh was defeated, it has become a place that could be suitable for having a safe zone. Now, the Russians are not quite encouraged towards this issue, and they are starting to bargain in this regard. So it is still an idea in the air. To what extent it can be implementable, no one knows for sure. However, Turkey is trying. There were joint American and Turkish military squads going through that area, and in order to test the visibility and the possibility of creating it. We continuously hear positive signs from the United States. Turkey is interested in that, and our people in Syria deserve a safe zone, a safe haven for them to get rid of the continuous bombardment on the part of the regime and its supporters.
Okay. Yusuf, Damascus has bitterly criticized this idea of the safe zone, and they've said that this is essentially a strike on the Syrian sovereignty. Now, obviously, the critics of Bashar al-Assad's regime would say that the regime is not legitimate itself. But the fact is that how does one square the idea of state sovereignty with something like this?
Well, frankly, I think the safe zone is a win-win situation for both the opposition and for the regime. Now, when you look at the territorial integrity of Syria, the biggest threat to Syria's territorial integrity is the YPG. And the YPG make up a huge chunk of the SDF. A safe zone into northeast Syria, providing a return for refugees, would help speed up the political solution process, as it would be viewed as normalization. Now, you have to realize there's 3.5, 3.6 million refugees in Turkey, most likely close to another million scattered throughout Europe. You have Jordan and Lebanon hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees as well. And the quicker these refugees can come back home under safe circumstances, under circumstances where they can lead a somewhat normal life resembling their old life, the quicker the political solution process can start. This cannot start without normalization. And starting a political solution process is not only what the opposition wants, it's also what the regime wants. And in return, this safe zone being taken part in northeast Syria would neutralize the strength of the YPG, which is the greatest threat to Syria's territorial integrity. So it's a win-win for both sides. And if this is something that Bashar al-Assad is against, it's something I think that he should look more deeper into, and he'll find that in the medium to long term, this is something that will be helpful for him if he can find a political survival after the political solution, of course.
Okay. Yusuf, YPG. Now, the Americans say that this is the group that has fought Daesh and has been very useful. It also has a secular outlook. With Turkey, obviously, the YPG has a different set of problems. But given the alliance between Turkey and the United States, is there any possibility that the two sides could work out this YPG problem?
I mean, any solution would have to see the YPG either completely disband and drop their weapons, or completely move south and later on in the process take part in the regime territory, or if the opposition would have the upper hand after a political solution process, take part in a dissolve and disband into an opposition army. But anything that sees the YPG have autonomy, anything that sees the YPG operate along Turkey's borders is a non-starter for Turkey. I mean, we're seeing the U.S. and Turkey take steps in a safe zone agreement, but at the same time yesterday, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, announced that he has plans to train another 40 to 50,000 YPG soldiers. So you can understand this makes the Turks very, very nervous to see that the Americans are showing some ill will towards the safe zone agreement, not acting in the spirit of the safe zone agreement.
Well, I get the point, but the Americans argue that the YPG, given its outlook, and also the fact that it was so effective against Daesh, is a force that needs to be supported. Now, I know that position is not reconcilable with Ankara's position, but you saying that so obviously the idea that they'll completely disarm is not going to happen. But how do you expect them to move away from their own area towards south? How's that going to come about?
First thing, it's not their own area; it's Syria's area. The YPG.
I mean, in the sense that they, within the Syrian polity or the erstwhile Syrian polity, they were in that area.
Now we need to differentiate between Syrian Kurds and the YPG. The YPG is not the Syrian Kurds. The YPG is an organization which has Marxist-Leninist beliefs. It's a paramilitary group. It's a group that Turkey views as terrorists. Now, there's a lot of Syrian Kurds in that region. 300,000 of them had to migrate and flee into Turkey, and they're still in Turkey, and they're hoping to be relocated after the safe zone is established. So there's a huge difference between the YPG and the Syrian Kurds. The Syrian Kurds don't have to leave that region, but the YPG does have to leave that region because they are a threat to Turkey's national security.
Okay. Before I let you go, a quick question. If this does not come to pass, quickly, there are two possibilities. One, Ankara said that we'll unilaterally move in and establish a safe zone. That means a military maneuver. And second, that they will let the refugees flow towards Europe, which obviously the first country that will come under tremendous pressure would be Greece, and then onwards further this thing. So how serious is Ankara about these moves?
I think President Erdogan's very serious about both moves. He's extremely serious about a unilateral operation if the safe zone is not created. And he's very, very disappointed in the way the EU has handled the refugee crisis in regards to Turkey. He's very disappointed at the silence of the EU with what's going on in Idlib. He's disappointed that the EU is not playing a greater role in preventing the migrant crisis. If you don't play a role in preventing the migrant crisis, once it is realized and it happens, you can't sit and whine about the results of it. You should have been present when this was preventable. Now, Turkey has tried to stop the Russians, it's tried to stop the regime, but Turkey's job, Turkey's mandate is advising and assisting the opposition, being a guarantor for the opposition. Turkey's mandate, Turkey's job is not attacking the regime. Turkey is not an aggressor to the regime. Turkey will defend itself. Turkey will react in the face of an action. But Turkey is not offensively engaging the regime, and this cannot be expected of Turkey.
Okay, thank you so much. Yusuf Aram speaking with us on this issue. Dr. Al-Arizi, do you agree when Yusuf said that if Bashar al-Assad rethinks this, he should also support the fact that Turkey is trying to create a safe zone in this area?
Well, I don't agree with that, because the regime lives under the principle of sovereignty, which is being broken by all the forces that are coming into Syria. Iran, the Russians, Hezbollah, and other terrorists. And always the sovereignty is the magic word that's being used there. We understand that it is the sovereignty of the chair of governing, not the sovereignty of the people or the safety of the people. So if he develops a better understanding, it would be a win-win situation. It is not as such, because we understand that the last thing that the regime cares about is the people. If he cared about them, he wouldn't have fled the country in the first place. Now, those refugees deserve real care due to the fact that Turkey is a neighbor, and there is a national security issue with regard to the PYJ. It has concentrated on this particular point about the safe zone, and it tried to get the help of the United States, because it's the only power that will create the balance with the Russians and with others in order to help in this issue. Turkey cares about its national interests, and this is its right. At the same time, it supports those refugees. It has hosted them for all these years now. The number is over around 4 million, and the threat by the president of Turkey that opened the borders, though could sound humiliating for Syrians in general, to being turned into a chip card that could be used in the hands of whoever in order to threaten others. But at the same time, they have to go somewhere, and they have to find safety wherever they can. And Turkey is thanked because of for that. At the same time, the parties that have to be blamed, the parties that have to be denounced, are those who are causing the flooding of the millions of people from Syria.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Yahya Al-Arizi speaking with us. We're also joined by Can Hasusu, who's an analyst at TRT World, joins us from Istanbul. Mr. Hasusu, you're talking about the safe zone tensions. President Erdogan has talked about essentially two things. One, that if negotiations and the setting up of the safe zone does not happen quickly, Turkey will unilaterally go in, which essentially means going in militarily, and that obviously means conflict with the YPG cadres also. And secondly, that it'll let the Syrian refugees flow towards Europe. How serious is this?
Well, actually, it is a very serious matter for Turkey and Erdogan's government as well, because the pressure is increasing since the beginning of the crisis in Syria. The immigrants and the Syrian refugees are very big discussion between the opposition party and the ruling AK Party. And the Syrian migrants in the Turkish society is a big deal for the opposition party. They are using this issue from time to time to put more pressure on the government. When the government tries to balance these pressures with some, some new acts to balance and to organize the immigrants and their position in Turkey by putting them in specific camps or checking their IDs or their legal documents, then the opposition starts to criticize the government by saying that the government is too harsh against the immigrants.
Oh, so there is a domestic political angle to this also. This is a new insight, because one generally thinks that this is kind of interstate, but intrastate within Turkey, you're saying the opposition is also putting pressure on the government.
I think the internal political pressure plus the economical pressure of this issue is very important for the ruling party here in Turkey, and specifically for Mr. Erdogan's government. And plus, in these days when we were witnessing heavy bombardment on Idlib, most of the civilians were criticizing Turkey. And they were actually talking about, according to our own sources from the field, they all feel safer if they go into Turkey, since the international community and Ankara can't stop this air bombardment, because these bombardments are not targeting only specifically like armed groups inside Idlib, but civilians as well. So all these people who are trying to live in their own country with dignity are being forced with these attacks to become a possible immigrant in Turkey or Europe. So Erdogan's words, I think, is not a threatening, or it's not only a threat, it is a warning, because the Turkish government cannot handle a big, massive wave of immigrants from Syria this time, specifically when it's facing another criticism from the opposition inside Turkey as well.
Okay, so what is your sense of how possible it is for the US and Turkey to come to an agreement on the safe zone?
The safe zone issue is an old thing for Turkey. Turkey has been offering this solution from the beginning. Turkey insists that a safe zone inside Syria will provide an area for the opposition to settle and to experience their democratic rights if there will be any democratic solution to what happens in Syria. So they can't oppose Assad regime from Belgium or France or England or Germany or Turkey. They have to be in their country to do that effectively. And most of the Syrians actually wants that. But the conditions on land inside Syria is not letting this to happen, because the military offensive of the regime supported by the Iranian army and the Russian air forces or the government is actually merciless for the civilians, and they can't find a safe place to live or to insist in their democratic rights or to oppose the existing government in Syria. So that's why Turkey is insisting on this solution. So far, America has been promising Ankara since 2 years to now, up until now, but they don't keep their promises. And Ankara has a kind of mistrust towards Washington. They don't really trust their words unless they see something solid on the ground. So far, Turkey is trying to keep the diplomatic channel open with Washington, since it thinks that America could be the balancing power when it's dealing with Iran and Russia at the other side. But Turkey, I think, since YPG specifically is a very important security matter for Turkey, Turkey is going to take the necessity, the steps to provide security for its own people, because the YPG's existence on the borderline specifically, and specifically in the naturally populated areas is a big threat and danger both for the future of the opposition that Turkey supports and for the security of Turkey at the same time.
I've run out of time. Otherwise, I would have asked a question about if Turkey goes in militarily and then gets bogged down in a military operation against YPG. How will that pan out? But unfortunately, this is all the time I'm left with. Thank you so much, Can Hassassu, for speaking with us. This is all from Indus Special this week. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.